Great to welcome everyone for the ColourNext session. It's a very, very important part of our entire work in terms of what we do, and I think it's really great that we have all of you coming, a lot of people coming from outside India and really seeing in terms of what are the color trends we are going to speak about. Before we really start, I wanted to take you to a journey in terms of what's really happening from a point of view of India design renaissance. And as we see it, I think today the India design is really straddling over the global stage. And we see that today it is something which is getting accepted as a global language coming very, very strongly. And not only this, we see so many brands really coming and really making their mark across various parts of the globe. And I think it is something which possibly is really expanding in a very, very big way. This is something which makes us proud, and it is something which gives the design community a very, very strong stroke in terms of keep on doing the kind of work which is happening today in India, which is really making a mark everywhere. And not only this, what we see also is that given the emergence of the Indian economy, we see a lot of international brands also making a very strong beeline for India and trying to really see that how are they able to kind of adjust their products, their design to the Indian sensibilities which are coming very strongly. So in a way, what we are seeing is a India confluence which is coming in, and that is something which is a great thing in terms of what we see in the environment. And taking this, the entire trend forward, we are looking at, embracing the whole area of India confluence in a very strong way. And what we are going to do is we are talking of opening a design destination in India, which is going to be opened very, very soon. And this design destination is really based on looking at collecting design from all over the places and seeing that this is one place where it kind of comes together. So we are looking at calling this place as Nilaya Anthology, which is there, which is a very big story in terms of what we want to tell in terms of going forward. And this is almost 100,000 square feet. I repeat, about 100,000 square feet space in center of Mumbai, which is coming and which is what we're going to open on 28th of February this month in terms of which is going to come alive. And I think today, when we look at it, thank you so much. Thank you. When we look at this is something which is really a design destination. Okay, it is something which is really experiential, and it holds a curatable selection of collectible art and contemporary design in its own very way, telling the stories from the world overall. It is a decorator's heaven because when you go around this space, you can pick up a vintage chandelier, you can pick up a pashmina cushion, you can pick up a Ginori plate which comes in, and you can even select a furniture which is out of Finland or Copenhagen or from Japan to that extent. That's the kind of design it kind of really offers. So in a way, this is not a retail space. It is something which we see as it's a cultural catalyst and a great storytelling experience. So I think we look forward in terms of seeing all of you at this place as we open this year in terms of looking at what it can be offering in the whole design retail space. And not only this, one of the big works in terms of what we keep on doing is the area of looking at future material and technology, because we believe that today, as part of the work which we are doing, color is embedded in terms of the substrate it kind of comes in. It is embedded from a point of view of the newer materials which are kind of taking shape. And from that angle, we believe that there is a lot of work which is being done in terms of looking at future material. And this is something which we will keep on working with technology, with experts to see what is it that we can really curate. And they really become the upcoming materials which we keep on seeing the designers using as they kind of go ahead. So we are curating a materials library at Nilaya Anthology, which is going to be there. And this is something which is an ongoing library, which will see a lot of dynamism in terms of newer material, newer technologies coming to shape together in terms of looking at it. And just to further this, We are not stopping at this. We are looking at really engaging the design community, engaging the students all across in terms of looking at how they can come together and be part of this entire program. We are announcing a residency program which comes in, which is inviting people not only from India, but international locations as well, to see that they can work with us and look at, really curating some of these materials and technologies as we kind of go ahead to that extent. I think it is something which is going to be very, very enriching in terms of the way it kind of really unfolds. And as we look at this, there is another program which is kind of taking the color to the world in terms of what we are doing. And this is a very important program for us again, because what we are speaking here is that we want to kind of really see that how can we really nurture color all across the world as we kind of go ahead. As part of this, our color team has been really working for the last decade, really collecting color and really kind of marking color from a point of view of a lot of algorithmic and visual methods which we see. And I think as we select the colors, they are from crafts, from history, from everyday usage to that extent. And this is something which we are making a very, very rich, unified repository of colors. This is the largest collection of colors in the world in terms of what we are launching, almost more than 5,300 shades which are going to come on the anvil in a body of work which is called the Chromacosm. So this is something which is another thing in terms of what really takes the color to the world. It brings about the whole area of confluence in terms of what we see. Indian colors really kind of embracing outside, and outside colors coming and really forming this body in terms of what we see. So it's another very, very strong initiative in terms of really seeing how we can really build the designers, aid the designers in terms of the work they do around color, because that's a pretty strong fabric of design as we look at it. The whole area of ColourNext, which is what we are speaking today, has been very close to us. We've been working on this since 2003, almost now 22 years. This is the largest research which happens in India around color in terms of what we do. And we truly believe very, very strongly in this. And a lot of people have been asking me, how do you do it? Is it an art or is it a science? How do you kind of really marry both? How does this kind of really come out in terms of an output which you see? It's actually, I think, a mix of both in terms of what we see. We think that today there are a lot of socioeconomic changes which are really happening around. These socioeconomic changes look at working around influencing lifestyle. From lifestyle, it leads to basically decor, and from decor, it leads to color and material. And therefore, I think for us, that's the process which we follow. We really kind of do visual audits. We go to design schools. We meet sociologists, designers, architects, and anyone who's a color opinion in terms of what we do, and look at possibly arriving at trends and stories which are possibly becoming important to that extent. And then with style leaders, style markers, we kind of work around in various workshops to kind of hone in into the clear stories which are gems which are just emerging, and we think they can become fairly big in times to come. And that's how we keep on nurturing this. And then our color team works around in terms of lending the stories. What are the colors which are kind of coming in? What is the kind of material which come in? And that is something which we call very strongly as the CMFT palette, which is color, material, finish, and textures, which kind of come as a final output. It is like literally like a mood board for the entire trend in terms of what we are looking at in terms of seeing. And that's the body of work which kind of comes up where we say that this is all about color and material intelligence. So that's, I think, the background in terms of the work, in terms of what we do overall to that extent. And now shifting gears to the most exciting part. And I can promise you that the stories, the trends which I'm speaking about, with all our people who are going to contribute around it, it is going to be something very, very exhilarating. Let's move on to the first story. The first story is something which is very interesting, what we call as the salt. Today, when we look at the story, we look at from a point of view of that the areas like sustainability and climate change are becoming very, very important because they are in the public forum, and it is something where people across the world are looking for sustainable materials which they can use for future. And when we looked around, salt was one such omnipresent material which was everywhere to that extent, and something which was sustainable, and we felt that this is a biomaterial which today is in abundance, and with some wonderful properties it kind of lends, and it could be really the material for future in terms of how you could have used it. So not only about the qualities it has, it is something which is also kind of attached with a certain design language, because when light diffuses through it, it kind of creates another crystalline pattern, which is amazing in terms of what it throws to that extent. And notwithstanding all this, it has properties which is like antibacterial or even carbon neutrality, which kind of comes along with it. So it kind of makes it a perfect material in terms of what we could kind of look at from this theme. And this theme comes in some of the words which I want to sum. So this theme is about literally talking about crystalline, it is talking about ethereal, it is primordial, and it is something which is metaphysical. So I think it kind of really sums up in terms of what this theme is all about. But important thing is that what led us to this entire theme, and there were certain data points, there were certain big data which are kind of coming around. And if you look at today, I think there is a body of work which is happening around in terms of saying that there are today salt emerging as a big area in terms of what people are using from a point of view making structures, and some part in terms of going into now construction, looking at salt bricks, salt rocks which are kind of coming in, and a part of this something which you will see today what we have put in our installations in our color pavilion. So I think this is something which is one very big trend in terms of what we are seeing. The other data which is emerging is that you've already heard about something which is called the salt spas, which are there already, which are used for their therapeutic use in terms of how they manifest overall to that extent. And not only this, when you look at salt is also a source of energy. Today there is a large area where salt water becomes an energy source. What you see as on the right-hand side of the screen is a large lantern which is lit with circulating salt water, which can last for about 45 days of energy, which can come in, and therefore a very big use in terms of what can happen with salt water as energy. And not only this, I think today you can create artifacts, furniture material, and so on and so forth by crystallizing salt, and one of the descriptions you see right on the screen in terms of what we have used. And finally, I think, as I said, when you look at the whole area of even fashion, we saw Issey Miyake using a rendition of this from a point of view of a pleated dress, which was inspired from looking at the salt patterns which kind of come into that extent. And as I said, this is something which is the big data which is coming, and we think it is something which is really coming up in a big way. This is the salt palette which comes in. If you see the palette, it has light to mid tonalities in terms of coming. It has literally something what we call as the soft pastels, and literally grounded, neutral grounded materials in terms of which kind of sync with each other as there. So these are all very layered, they are nuanced in terms of what it comes, and this is the kind of soft palette which it comes. It has a bit of metallics, so a hint of the metallics which kind of come into that extent overall, which kind of enrich the palette from a point of view of how it kind of looks. And as I said, the color patterns flow into the material palette. And the material palette is something which looks like this, which is a combination of a textured glass, a mirror glass, crystalline surfaces, something which is granular in nature, something which is resin and salt, which kind of comes together. It talks of rock salt. It talks of a lot many of these things coming together in terms of creating various kind of finishes, textures. So I think a very strong visual trend as well in terms of what it speaks of in terms of the various materials which kind of come together to kind of give this theme a very, very great distinction from how it stands. So this is about salt. Let's see how the pictorial version of this entire thing looks like.
Can salt, the mineral omnipresent in our daily lives, become the biomaterial of the future? At a time when sustainability goals are driving a shift towards renewable resources, Salt emerges as an emblem of possibility. From its ability to diffuse light to its antibacterial properties, salt's innate versatility makes it a bridge between the elemental and the ethereal. As a material, salt is reactive and shape-shifting. While the forecast palette captures salt's crystalline qualities and its occasional murkiness. Salt, it carries into the future stories forged over millennia.
You can clap for it if you're liking the trend, for sure. I would like to invite Male Uribe on the stage to kind of really take you through her work in terms of what is there, which really celebrates this entire theme of salt. Male, it's all yours.
So thank you for that introduction. I'm thrilled to be here and share my experience as someone who is deeply obsessed with materials and experimental processes. Salt Imaginaries is a long-term project that started in 2018 in London and Chile, and that will probably be a project that will go on for the rest of my life. As you will see, it really feels like a limitless source of inspiration and possibilities. So just to give you some context about my practice and background and why I ended up doing what I'm doing, here's a really quick preview of some selected projects that I have designed and directed, which divide in two main areas. On the top line, there's an area that has been driven by design and commercial commissions in the worlds of fashion and exhibition design. On the left, you can see two projects that I designed at Story Studio in London, where I worked for 6 years, leading interior and immersive projects for the luxury retail industry and some wonderful museums like the Victoria and Albert Museum. And in the bottom, you have some projects that are immersive and narrative, but that have been fully self-initiated out of just some crazy ideas that I had. So here's where the fun and the challenge really starts, because as you all know, having a strong idea but no specific client or commission or funding means that you have to be really, really passionate about it so that you can really push it through and bring it to life. So why salt? This is a question that I've been answering probably daily or at least weekly since 2018, because as you know, salt is known to be an unstable material. It looks fragile. It reacts to humidity. It is everywhere. It has had thousands and thousands of practical uses in history. However, material design and architecture hasn't really been one of them. Of course, this is shifting, and that's why we're here now talking about salt. So starting this project was really challenging because everyone I went to for advice or support would look at me with a bit of frustration, like they could already see me failing in the attempt of making something with salt. Happily, I am quite stubborn, and rejection at the time only served as fuel to me, or at least I was passionate enough to ignore all those objections and warnings. So most of all, I think I was just too curious about discovering this strange substance. And it all started as a sort of discovery trip. I was traveling in the Atacama Desert in Chile, in South America, where I'm from. I was living at London at the time, and I had just finished my master's at the Royal College of Art, and I was reading all these complex ideas about new materialism and how materials have an agency, right? And I was standing there in the middle of the desert, and it was all covered in this chusca, which is a brown dust that covers everything. And I bumped into this really small white crust, and I flipped it, and I saw all these beautiful, beautiful textures that looked like they were digitally rendered. And this is just a result of time and light and wind and humidity, temperature, all interacting together, allowing salt to shape itself. So I saw material agency for the first time with my own eyes. I mean, I really understood it for the first time. So this discovery moment made a shift in my perception, and it was strong enough for me to propose to the Design Museum in London to spend a full year doing a research about salt in the Atacama, as I had won the residency program that they have yearly in London. So as part of that program, I went back to Chile, to the Atacama Desert, but this time to travel through it, looking at it through the lens of salt. So as you can see, this is not a project that started looking at salt as a material closely, but rather the beautiful landscape where it comes from, and discover the unique conditions of this saline, extremely dry and strange Martian landscape that has these rising and strong autonomous geological formations that were created with absolutely no human intervention. It is one of the driest deserts in the world, the Atacama, with really rare but beautiful, whimsical natural water reserves, where the first extremophile life forms appeared. These are stromatolites. These are really rare plaster and salt formations that are rich in cyanobacteria, the first microorganisms that created oxygen in the planet. So they're rarely found in the planet, and they're responsible for any life form. So they're real treasures that were created and preserved by salt. And these apparently inert sulfates allow for these rich ecosystems to coexist, right, from invisible microorganisms to migratory flamingos and other birds. It is a landscape where salt has also been used as building blocks by humans, like stacking rocks, that served as structures that for ancestral communities and local communities who didn't really see salt as a fragile material, but rather as an architectural system. They saw it as shelter. And still, salt creates its own structures without our interaction, right? Creating these beautiful systems and crusts and textures that vary a lot depending on the minerals and atmospheric conditions that you find around it. It is also a land where multiple mining industries have colonized the landscape, from copper to other metallic minerals, but mainly saline minerals like nitrates in the 20th century in South America, and nowadays lithium, which has shifted the value of salt in really radical ways, depending on different technical and cultural revolutions in history. And these mining activities leave unthinkable traces of discarded salts, tons and tons of minerals that are turned into displaced matter. And these wasted minerals seem to not only be inert, but forgotten and kind of ripped from any form of value or agency. But even then, even as waste, they do have an agency, and salt is the perfect mineral to prove it. I took this photograph of a rock at 6 a.m. in an open salt mine that was abandoned. And I saw all these crystallized lines growing in the most organic-like way. It became very clear to me that being inorganic didn't really mean what we thought. And that if we really pay attention and observe and recover the admiration and respect for minerals, maybe we would treat them differently and maybe we would use them differently as designers. This is just an image of the same spot where you can see all these rocks kind of looking at the sunrise. Of course, this is probably an interpretation of my poetic worldview, but I like to think they were looking at the sunrise. And this made me question how design really looks at the material world, always categorizing between dividing lines, between organic and inorganic, between human and inhuman. And this conceptual shift is an act of humility as well, of realizing that minerals belong to a much, much longer and broader history of geological formation, where we sit in the very, very end of that geological timeline. This is one of my favorite quotes from the book Vibrant Matter from Jane Bennett, where she says, "In the long and slow time of evolution, mineral materials appear as the mover and shaker, the active power, while human beings, with their much lauded capacity for self-directed action, appear as its products. We are walking, talking minerals." As you saw before, salt is really in our bloodstream and in our tears. The question now was, how can we celebrate this material agency from design, or at least acknowledge it? So there I was at the Design Museum, And I had this design challenge. I was questioning how could I do something with salt and how could I bring all those narratives from the desert to a museum in London. And this is how design always works for me, as a sort of complex constellation of ideas and observations that then somehow start linking with each other. So at the moment, I could see salt as a token for material agency, as a medium to connect with all these local narratives that I showed you, as a carrier of varied forms of economical and cultural value, especially thinking on lithium nowadays, and the promise for, a green energy, as an opportunity for potential sensorial effects that we saw previously with transparency, shine, color, a challenge for material design and innovation. Of course, it's a challenge to make something stable out of salt, but most of all, an opportunity for nurturing a more conscious and sustainable design approach towards recycling and using salt that has been disregarded somehow. So I started experimenting, letting salt do its thing, crystallizing everywhere. It was quite challenging at first because salt turned out to be a very independent material, very unpredictable, it's really hard to guide it. And I didn't have the resources at the time to collaborate with a professional lab, so I kind of created my own lab. And after a lot of trial and error, I got to these final tiles that were created with a very simple method of plaster, salt, and some other simple materials. And it was also a very simple geometry where salt could slowly crystallize on the surface in a sort of controlled way. And the simplicity of this design and fabrication method would allow me to think on a large scale, on a repetition of a tile that could create a texture and a pattern, thinking that I wanted salt to be presented in an architectural scale, not as an object, but as something bigger than us, as something that could perform in a way. So the tiles created a textured mural as a performative device that could present salt in this new scale and plane and order. And this is how the first installation of the project came to life, through a window at the top floor of the Design Museum, where you could see the sun rising, bringing all these essential scenographic elements from the Atacama to London, where, of course, you would find this 3.5 meters wall made out of salt in the center. So in the long term, all these tiles would be slowly growing and crystallizing on the surface in a very subtle way, so you wouldn't see it immediately, but over the days and weeks. In the short term, it would captivate the public's attention with a dynamic lighting system that would be shifting, bringing this wall to life, making it perform with shifting patterns, and creating a sort of optical effect that would make people come closer and then discover that actually this was not ceramic or concrete, but a weird porous surface that was salt. There were other elements in the space to bring all these scenographic ideas, some furniture, rock displays, there was a film, a sound piece. So in the end, this project that started as a crazy discovery in the desert ended up being an opportunity to use design as a bridge to build new imaginaries and communicate them sensorily to people. And in this case, presenting salt, an overlooked and ordinary material that we all know about, not as a neutral piece of matter, but as a locally based substance, in this case from South America, but it could be everywhere, anywhere, carrying a constellation of all those local atmospheric, chromatic, and sensorial qualities. They're like attached to the material. And this brings us to the second iteration with the one I'm finishing, a whole new imaginary, a new palette, which is also based in the Atacama territory, but this time looking at the world of lithium, the promise for green energy with this whole new aesthetic imaginary. The Salar de Atacama, where the bigger liquid state lithium reserve exists in the world, characterizes for these light and electric greens and yellows and blues that display really lithium in different concentration levels. You can also see and feel and hear water running strongly in pipes from the underground to the surface, and tons of discarded salts that are being piled up in the surroundings with no potential use or commercial value other than a tiny percentage that is used as de-icing salt for the roads. So these salts that were once part of an underground millenary brine are now what I call salt geographies, because they have really reshaped the territory in the Atacama. It's a whole new landscape. And the thing is, the mining industry see waste, but I may be a little bit crazy, but I just see a wonderful material that is being misunderstood. So there I was again, experimenting with salt in a lab, only this time in a real lab, with way more advanced possibilities, as I was collaborating with an engineering school in Chile. The project was also supported by a lithium mining company who allowed me to get access to these restricted areas of lithium. I kept working with simple casting techniques, but this time using temperature and other variables, hygroscopic chemicals that would allow me to make tiles out of 100% salt, in this case, sylvinite, which is one of the wasted salts that is produced during the evaporation of lithium. And the result was this new immersive environment that brought to space the electric color of lithium in the final stages. There was also a group of different objects in the space that would bring this narrative character. Because, these tiles or material applications, I always like to put them, they never sit on their own. I always like to present them surrounded by these atmospherical aspects. So this is the slightly curved wall. It was also 3.5 meters. I designed 2 triangular-shaped tiles that would create this pattern. In the previous mural that I showed you, there were shifting lights, right, that would help people to get attention into the center of the piece. But in this case, the geometrical composition would do that on its own and intrigue people enough to get closer and really see that this was 100% salt. I also, these are some other details of the wall. And these are naturally formed rocks that were collected in the lithium ponds and in the areas around it. That really remind us that even though I found a way to control and guide salt would always be crystallizing and shaping itself in a much stronger and beautiful way than I could. Here you can see the panel, that kind of geographical, museographic panel of rocks on the right, with 24 different rocks of the area. And in the center, you can see the piece agency, as I called it, which is a totem that presented in the most pure way the ability of salt to grow. These were some of the iteration designs, and that ended up being these conic-shaped metal structures that were submerged into the lithium ponds and were left there for a few weeks to crystallize. So it really was a sowing and harvesting process. Time and sun did all the job. I just created a 3D framework for it to collect the salt before it crystallized on the bottom and was turned into waste. Here you can see the same installation in a different location, in a palace in Santiago. So before the question was why salt, and now the question is what's next? I think me, among many other artists and designers around the world, have been working with salt and already proved that there is potential. The challenge now is to scale it up, is to find partnerships and to make it more visible and tangible. The potential is huge, considering that salt is a resource that we can find everywhere. It's available, and it can offer huge local possibilities. These are just some of the tiles and objects that I just collected from the last harvesting I did a couple months ago in the lithium ponds in Chile, that are going to be hopefully installed in a large-scale installation in the desert. These panels have only a thin layer of a sealer, so they're really meant to exist in the dry desert and not interact with humidity. But I'm also working on the technology of the previous murals to make salt stronger, to improve the mechanical properties, and to improve also the interaction with humidity. So that's what's next, and Minera Sofia is how I'm calling now this bigger or broader project, because salt gave me a framework and a worldview that now really lives within me. But after living in London for so long and moving back to Chile, I realized that there are many other minerals, many other forms of mineral waste from mining industries that are being really overlooked. So I'm working on a few other material lines, with salt being one of them. And ultimately, the goal is to use design, art, and the immersive qualities of minerals as a medium to communicate new imaginaries, new ways of seeing that can somehow connect us more deeply to our natural resources and our local communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Malay. That was really amazing. And I think it gave you proof in terms of the work which is happening around this trend is actually a reality. It's not something which is just located in the clouds to that extent. And I think next time you eat salt, all these pictures will emerge in front of you for sure to that extent. And I think it's amazing to see that this is something which is what is a trend which is coming up. And I see, Malay, this we will go ahead a lot in this in terms of looking at this dream becoming really possible in terms of looking how salt really becomes a strong biomaterial for construction as we kind of go ahead and for all other uses. Let's quickly move on to the next trend, the next story, which is equally exciting. This story is what we call as the India Everywhere. I just touched upon this story when we started the entire presentation. And this is a story where we find that the India design is really straddling on the global stage in a very big way. Without today, the exotic, all coverage identity which India used to have, which is opening the platform to paradoxes and multitudes. Today, it is now coming out of the boxed image where the narrative was about craft, exoticism, or even about mass manufacturing to that extent. And it is now really aligning and using heritage as something which is reimagined and not over-explained to that extent. And that is how this language is now becoming part of the global design language in a very, very strong way. When we look at some words to describe this trend describes by, pride and provenance, looks at being global, looks something which is refined and sophisticated in terms of the way it kind of turns out. And as you go from the point of view of looking at what brings us here, I think some of the big data, again, is something which is very, very impacting, something which is very pressing. We just had Daljit, who's an Indian artist who's been very strong, kind of perform at the Coachella. And I think that was a big kind of acceptance in terms of what possibly Indian music is kind of really creating outside to that extent. And not only that, we see so many brands now really kind of traveling to various countries outside. We talk of the Roastery coffee house, which is now opened in Finland. We talk of, Harrods kind of taking a brand for Ayurvedic, which is called Ranavat. We have other brands like the chocolates, which is called Manam, which is another chocolate which is kind of making waves and going across to that extent. The whole sneakers brand, which is the Gully Labs, is also making marks now across various parts of the globe. And we see that this is the proliferation in terms of the acceptability of Indian design, Indian language happening all across, which is showing that how is this proliferation getting really accelerated in terms of going forward. A very interesting palette, which kind of really moves from mid to some of the deep tones in terms of what you see to that extent. It has got some soft gray undertones, which is around, which gives us the refinedness in terms of what we speak of. And finally, there are rich, mellow and dark shades which are coming together in a very different way to that extent. So my favorites being the Pista Glamour and the Madder Rose, which kind of comes in here to that extent, how they kind of really are harmonious and they sit with each other in terms of the overall palette, how it looks. Coming to the material, again, this is a very diverse material. Some of these things is something which we know, whether it is about copper, whether it is about cane, whether it is a contemporary bidri work, or it is about even the ceramic glazes in terms of what we see. Some of this work comes together in terms of forming various kind of materials which are coming in to that extent. And I think the list kind of expands in terms of even sandstone and other things in terms of what comes together in terms of making the material palette far more richer in terms of the way it kind of pans out. Let's look at visually how this trend looks like.
Indianness is now represented in a global design language. Once boxed into narratives of craft, exoticism, and kitsch, today heritage is no longer over-explained. When folklore and tradition are woven into contemporary design, it is not always recognizable. Material authenticity, cultural context, the imperfections of the handmade, These factors take precedence over obvious design representations. A sophisticated and color-confident palette with textural juxtapositions capture this moment. As Indian concepts flourish on the global stage, India, it seems, is everywhere, but hiding in plain sight.
That's the second story for you. I'm sure you're liking it. And, I'm not calling another person right now like Maler immediately because there's a big surprise which will come for a person who would kind of really come and really talk of all the trends which I'm talking about now in terms of going. And I'm sure you're going to really love that. Going on to the next trend in terms of what we are speaking, and this trend is something which is going to be very big as we see it. It is something which we called as the bad taste question mark, okay? It is definitely a controversial trend in terms of what we see. We now see that luxury is not about a whisper, it's a roar in terms of the way it comes. We know that today this kind of aesthetic is something which is the bad taste was something which was not really liked by the rich elite, the traditional rich in terms of that sense. And now it is making a rebellious comeback in a way in terms of how it is kind of talking of really shunning the restrained elegance in terms of what possibly was there in the earlier elitist world in terms of what we used to see. This trend is all about flamboyance, all about audacity. It is something which is over-the-top self-expression, which comes out in terms of really shunning and really kind of denying something which we call as the muted palettes and even the understated design in terms of what it was coming to that extent. And therefore, it is something which is a bit of a societal change in terms of what we are speaking about, and that is why the question mark in terms of what we said. So if you were to describe this trend, it is something what we would kind of call it is something playful. It is something which is vibrant in that sense, it is audacious, it is rebellious in the way it kind of really unfolds. So that's the story in terms of how this trend comes in. And what is the big data saying about this to that extent? We see it all over the place in terms of what is there. When we go to the Milan Design Week 2024, we saw really the excesses really coming out in terms of what was on the ramp to that extent, really kind of giving credence to this trend which was coming out to that extent. We look at possibly some of the spaces, an exclusive member place in London, which has literally golden glides in terms of the way it kind of really appears, and something which is very different in terms of the maximalist kind of thing it kind of comes in. The other is there is a eatery in US, which basically at the entry has a wild boar as a sculpture, which kind of comes into that extent. And it is something which is very different in terms of the way it is there. There are books. There is the whole book by Nathalie Ola, which kind of talks of this entire trend coming very, very strongly to that extent. And this is something which we have been seeing today in some of the designers in India as well, in terms of what we see. We just had a Sabya fashion show, which had reminiscences of this entire taste kind of coming into that extent. And we feel that this is something which is going to be strong as you kind of really go ahead. The palette obviously is something which is a little bit of a defiant palette with bold contrast in terms of what you see. It is not something which is flowing in very seamlessly to that extent. As I say, this is more theatrical to that extent in terms of the way each colors are sitting with each other in some form of a contrast to that extent. And therefore, it has the whites, the blacks, the bolds, the vibrance in terms of coming together very strongly as a trend in terms of what we see. But I think equally amazing is the material palette in terms of what you see. Today, in terms of this palette, again, animal prints, animal surfaces which kind of come together, or whether it is the glossy surfaces which are also coming, blending with the surface embellishments in terms of what you see. Overall, metallics coming and adding to the glory, and things like malachite also really blending into that extent. So you see so many areas which kind of really blends into the material, just kind of talking of the bold nuance, the whole rebellious kind of output in terms of the way it is kind of looking in terms of folding. Let's visually look at what it looks like.
Luxury no longer whispers, it roars. The aesthetic once dismissed as bad taste has risen in rebellion. This movement celebrates flamboyance and audacity. It rejects muted palettes and understated designs, the traditional hallmarks of luxury. Instead, it embraces a visual language dripping with glitz, glamour, and deliberate excess, an ode to the unapologetically nouveau riche. The new definitions of luxury are playful and infinitely more inclusive. Metallic accents, animal prints, and vibrant designs now carry the torch of self-expression, signaling a break from the austere rules of good taste. It's about embracing chutzpah and an attitude unfazed by criticism.
Do you really like this trend? Okay, or people are still hiding their faces here and there because I said a question mark. Okay, but I think you must visit the pavilion and see in terms of what the output looks like. It's something which is simply static. It's something very different in terms of how it really stands out to that extent. Let's go on to the next trend, the next story. Again, very exciting story in terms of what we speak about. This story, we call it as the Feel More. And this story is all about feelings and emotions coming alive strongly. You know, in a fast-paced world, when we look at the whole area of the algorithmic sameness, which is kind of coming in, people are now getting open to awe-inspiring experiences, you know, which kind of open up the feelings in the space of tactility, open in terms of immersiveness. It looks at the whole area of the visceral, which is kind of really coming alive in terms of the entire feelings and experiences which are kind of coming in. As we go ahead, people are also getting really very comfortable with looking at big feelings which are coming about with overall experiences, overall lifestyles, even family situations to that extent. And therefore, emotion is going to play a very, very big role in terms of as we unfold this trend. So this trend is really about haptic. It is about encompassing. It is something which we talk of visceral and something which is novel to that extent. And that's how possibly this trend really unfolds. Let's look at the big data in terms of what's telling the story. Very interesting. Today, if you look at the whole area, the whole immersive experience is something which is kind of taken by many places across the countries. You have the Las Vegas sphere. I am sure some of you would have experienced this, and it is an amazing kind of an experience which it kind of really creates. You talk of the entire balloon museum, which is opening in London in terms of what it talks of in terms of a space which is really something which kind of hits you in terms of from the point of view of how it has been really conceptualized to that extent. You talk of, the entire area of the kaleidoscope which has been created by Suchi Reddy, in the museum, the building material museum which is there. And it is something which really stands out, something very different to that extent. And similarly, I think we saw that Chengdu in China is something, architectural beauty in terms of what they have kind of really created in terms of this space. But one very interesting fact which comes out is that a lot of brands are now speaking of what we call as the emotioneering, which they kind of really look at what are the kind of emotions which people are showing with respect to the brands, and they try to really arch or position their brands around it to that extent. So it's a science which is becoming very, very important from the point of view of how this is kind of unfolding, and this really becomes a very, very big story in terms of going forward. The color palette is obviously something which is really one of my favorites because it really blends into each other. It is like a muted symphony in terms of what you see. Nothing is contrasting, nothing really stands out. It is something which kind of really weaves it in. Because there are soft hues and light tones which are really kind of enlightening the whole palette in terms of the way it kind of comes out. And if you look at the material palette here, the material palette is lovely in terms of what is there. We see some of the untwisted yarn which comes together. The whole area of blown glass forms which can kind of lend a shape. The textured ceramics which come alive, the multi-layered fabrics, the whole area of wax which is there to that extent. So very, very interesting kind of a material palette, which kind of shows the multitonality in terms of surfaces, colors, and so on and so forth, even in terms of the movement, in terms of what really kind of encompasses from that. Let's look at basically the visual delight of this.
In a world with increasing algorithmic sameness, we are seeking authentic encounters. We want to really feel our feelings. There is a hunger for the visceral, for the tactile, for the truly immersive. This manifests as a courageous exploration of experiences and lifestyles that don't meet current societal norms. We're comfortable with acknowledging big feelings and living with them. So our created environments will be sensorially lavish and self-assured, even if it represents some sort of individualistic absurdity. The colorful details are embedded in the complexity and layering of the palette. We no longer hide the gray parts of our lives anymore. Because whether comfortable or uncomfortable, we want to feel more.
You can feel happy. It's a happy trend, a happy story in terms of what you see. But you will feel even far more elated and happy when I'm going to tell you that the next person who's going to kind of really set the stage on fire, literally, is a person who's really going to kind of culminate and create in terms of how all these trends are shaping up in creating something which is very, very different. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce Ishan Kashyap. For him, the world is a playground. Over the years, the chef turned designer and stylist. Welcome, Ishan.
This is going to be a feast, essentially. I'm all about color. I prefer living in color, of course, you can see. This is I navigate beautifully through it. And whatever Amit mentioned, sort of resonated really well. You all must take some time and experience each and every part of the pavilion. To begin with, something very simple, something very close to us is a table. Everything happens around the table. All the conversations, all the love stories, all important things, everything is around it. And all the trends that you saw are sort of amalgamated, woven through different narratives, what you're going to see in this photo essay. So for me, form, color, texture, flavor, all ingredients. I treat food as an ingredient for design. I mean, it could be love, it could be a pendant, it could be a proposal. This is a little ring made with bread, which is better than diamonds, I promise you, because she or he is going to remember it for the rest of their life. So the idea is to play around with all of these different tactile materials, take inspiration from something as basic as a lettuce or a cabbage and convert it into, and work with ceramic. I actively work with different glazes and experimentation. Salt is a huge part of what I have been very fascinated with, apart from adding into the food and playing with it, or cooking on salt for that matter. We are surrounded by so much noise, we are surrounded by so much design, but I think what really stands out in terms of the trends that you will see is your own personality, being unapologetically bold, the choices of color, pattern, texture that you blend in together is something that I own very vividly. There's no right or wrong way how you do it. For example, these are edible gold popcorn with caramel. Of course, why not? I mean, butter, truffle, salt, everybody's done it. The plate that you see is cast brass plated with 24-karat gold. Now, the opulence of the dust is something which makes it ridiculously sort of opulent, but again, why not? What you see in the center is one of my favorite materials that I work with. It's golden pyrite and candle stands with golden pyrite. So the idea is that around your table there is so much glimmer, sparkle. There's so much, sort of a refraction of light which happens. I use a lot of luster glazes also when we work with different people. So it's interesting and incredible that, India is so rich in craft material. I mean, the length and breadth is sort of rich with something, right, from food to flavor. And for me, the table is a storytelling medium where, everything sort of comes together. What you see here is something absolutely simple, made in India, and can be anywhere in the world, from museums to houses to, it's a very brave choice of colors, but the idea is that it adds a pop of surprise, it adds a lot of drama instantly, and you immediately are drawn towards it. These are composite resin blocks which are made in large dies. This is a byproduct of marble, which is sort of then combined with different resin, marbled. I've done more than 28 different versions of colors with metallic sheens, and it's incredible. It's just fascinating to see how bold or excited it can make any sort of, even a boring Monday can be, sort of exciting with it. Here what you see here again, choices that I make which are very bold. Bad taste is good, and once you see the booth at the pavilion, there will be something which will make you smile. There will be something which will resonate you. I promise you will click a photo there of something that you all would like, from geometry to color. I mentioned that I usually treat a food ingredient as a base for design. So for me, I've been working recently with watermelon. Each person carves a watermelon differently, and that watermelon becomes a form for dye for me to cast a vase. So I have watermelons here, which at the end of this session, we're not giving lunch, but just to show you that how the same ingredient, something so simple, it's in everybody's fridge or around us, but how you see things differently. And I think, again, there's no right or wrong to it. Like, at times I serve it with kimchi and feta, but at times I just let it be here, to sort of stand out. I use a play of marbling dots and checks because it comes very naturally, and I think it's the current need of the hour, where everybody picks a little tone of it. Again, here is a representation of how things sort of are seen differently. It's a sunflower which is being sliced, and just to see the extraction of the details of what the stem holds in for me, or the contrast, and it's placed on a little rock which is glazed with scroll glazing, which is a technique, and it makes it beautiful, with a little green pea salad. Now, it's up to you how you perceive it, or, like a conceptual art reference here, but it's a pea salad and it can be served. Or a little Thai with tomatoes, or again, the cabbage comes back. What you see here is something I'm extremely excited about, and you will see components of it at the pavilion. There are layers of bad taste, India everywhere, literally. This is all from India. Feeling abundantly attracted to it, and of course salt. Malachite or components of a little shell golden pyrite. I call it table jewelry. Now, prehistorically, India is all about opulence. I mean, right from the Mughals or Deccan, I mean, there are components of beautiful patterns of jewelry that, people have worn. And the intricacies of those jewelries have got translated into architecture, design, literature, performative, sources. And I thought, why not have something which is absolutely luxurious, that even on a boring day, if I'm having a toast with butter, I'll apply the butter with the ruby knife. Again, why not? So these are components of a little mood of red with, there's a moonstone coral right there. What you see is almost a reference of a bindi, which is, something which, or a dot, or nothing, just a point, but it just adds color. And a little twig, which is just from a morning walk. It's been dipped in real silver. Just to show you all, we had some samples. This is a dried orchid, which has been dipped in real gold, because everybody has flesh flowers, so why not keep something which is semi-permanent, but it's also fragile. So the idea of salt or beauty is also, I think, time, and it's not permanent, so it's important to enjoy it till it lasts. What you see, these rocks here are also something super interesting. These are a byproduct of vegetable mass, which we essentially dip it in resin and then coat them. Again, they're not permanent, but the idea of something which is so rough and tactile in a certain way and terrific to look at. I mean, a red or a white or a blue looks beautiful. So again, very plant-based. What you see here is again something which stands out throughout within the concept of India everywhere. The peacock feather, it's a symbol which is, I mean, very prominent all across the world. I think, but for me or where I come from, I think it's interesting how the ceruleum or how the colors really combine together. It's extraordinarily opulent. At the same time, it's so simple, right from simple rituals to decoration. This is one little feather which is collected, not plucked, have been used. The image that you see here is a tablecloth which is made with almost 4,000 peacock feathers collected and put together. A cast jackfruit, which is, again, gold being put together. These are plates by Thomas Good, for example, which is an English brand, but the entire legacy of the brand, sort of was based on the Maharaja of Baroda and the Deccan Maharajas, etc. And all the motifs have been taken. So it's interesting how India is genuinely everywhere, where the entire foundation of the museum, all the designs are India, or those little parrots that you see as the napkin rings. Again, a visual reference of an anthurium which is dried, which is dipped in gold, and for a simple panna cotta or just watermelon or any fruit could be enjoyed on it, and carved, inlaid, again, very much in India. And here, Malay, you'll be slightly happy to see that I've been trying, not at the lab level, but these are experiments where I've been fascinated with the idea of reflection and working with crystals in my own way with alum and boric salt. And hopefully, I mean, we get to go to her base camp and see how it's done. But this is also something which is very current. This is also something which is very much of interest for everybody. I mean, I come from, obviously, the kitchen background where salt is very fascinating as an ingredient. And I also do larger weddings, and you'll be surprised that one of the key trends from 2024 that we've been doing is a performative table theater based on one ingredient. It could be chili, it could be salt. So the idea of using, all the experiments like the plates and the chair and the furniture, so could probably be incorporated. Ice is something which is extraordinarily beautiful. We used some of it yesterday. We have a sample left which didn't melt. I'm going to show that to you right now, where the idea is that something as simple as a material like ice can be sculpted into anything, and candles could come out of it right here. So we had these, so we thought, why not show you some pieces of it. So again, you can make islands, you can make anything with it. So, and it's a material which is not permanent, I think, and that is what makes me most excited, that you really have to be in the moment to enjoy it, and you can't really sort of take it forward for a longer time. Again, I try and use salt crystals with ice because I think the idea of how the light passes through it is very beautiful. Again, ice and fire is sort of interesting as a play of word, play of materials, and it sort of, food can be served on it. So it's almost like an edible decor, edible tablescape, which, sort of happening. Well, it's lunchtime, but we still have some more time to see some amazing things. I have a watermelon here, which I'm just going to cut while you see this little video. And I'll show you how a piece of fruit becomes a piece of decor or a source of inspiration or design. So.
From the south side of Chicago, yeah.
I've never done it on stage, I promise. Don't judge my knife skills at the moment, but we do have a collection of vases, like, that I've been working on where, each piece, and everybody cuts it differently, and we make sort of a die out of it for casting. And yeah, we sort of put out anything. It could be just a little piece of comes into a vase. So thank you.
And now comes the very interesting part when we talk of the trends you have seen. You've seen the palettes, you've seen the material kind of palettes which have also come into that extent. And we now speak of something which is great from the point of view, the color of the year 2025. And this is something which is very, very exciting because this comes in from the stories which we are talking of. This comes from the trends which we are talking of. And it is not something which is out of the blue, which just comes in. And therefore, the color of the year, as is reflected on the slide, is something which is very, very great, and we call this as cardinal. So cardinal is really a color which urges us to really explore the entire feelings, a spectrum of feelings, which is from joy to vitality, to from stillness to being contemplative. It is a soulful, dusky shade which is there. It has got a tone of violet, and it has got an undertone of gray, which kind of really comes into that extent. And it is something which really kind of honors the human mind in terms of what is there, and really looks at, really appreciating the beauty of really pure authentication in the way you think, the way you feel. So essentially, it is something which is about bringing the whole feeling and the emotion alive to that extent. And that's what we call as cardinal. Some of the words which come to your mind is, it's talking about being mystique. It is something which is imaginative, it is immersive, and it is also about being pensive to that extent. Let's look at what this color unfolds.
Cardinal is a nostalgic purple, soulful, dusky, and complex. This shade is strong in character, but compromising enough for different environments. Warm, serene, maybe even bittersweet. Cardinal, making spaces, but also holding space for itself.
I'm sure you're going to enjoy this color. As you go by the year, you'll keep on kind of embracing this color far more strongly and seeing in terms of how it keeps on coming into your life as you go by. And not only about the color of the year, we have another interesting property which we speak about every year in terms of how it unfolds from the colored work which we do, the material work which we do. And this property is what we call as the wallpaper of the year. So the wallpaper of the year also is something which is great. Today at Asian Paints, we make our own wallpapers as well to that extent. And this is something which germinates out of that in terms of what is the inspiration it is drawing. So this wallpaper is all about being serene to that extent. It is all about the fact that it is based on a built heritage which is there. And when you see that from a corner of, say, ancient, Indian courtyard to that extent, to how the spring tunes blossoms up, I think it is a really interesting story in terms of what it tells. It's all about a very, very happy wallpaper in that sense in terms of what you see, which is about the open sky, a house which has been always lived in forever, and something which gives you a real sense of happiness and content which comes in. The words which really describe this wallpaper is about go slow, breathe, stay a while, and that's what this wallpaper is all about. Let's see what is it saying. So that's the wallpaper of the year. I'm sure that you will like this to be adorned in your homes to that extent as you kind of go ahead. But I think as we kind of wrap up this session, I want to just tell you that we have a color forecast which is available both online and hard copies as well. As you kind of walk into our color pavilion, it's available there. Please do go and visit. I know Ishan has done a very good job of selling you to kind of go to the color pavilion, but please do. I think all the installations are just lovely. Feel it. Yesterday I saw someone trying to lick one of the salt installations there to that extent. The person was trying to say whether it is real salt or not to that extent. So you'll find lots of experiences like this as you kind of walk into the installation and really savor the whole area of the color trends, the material palettes in terms of the way it is there. Thank you all for being a lovely audience. Thank you so much.